So essentially, this collection was all about, it was titled Wow. And it's really all about going back to this childhood sensibility of doing things, which I found really interesting as an idea from Matthieu Blazy. To quote something he said in the show notes, he said, as a kid, there is the adventure of the everyday. There's a feeling that anything could happen, no matter how fantastical, and we are not so bound by regular expectations and conventions. The door is open to the possibility of strange realities and wonder, impossible scenarios that banish disillusion. This is about the power of sincerity over strategy, which I found really interesting because this power of sincerity over strategy really plays into the playful nature that we saw in the collection. It really is about, going back to things being sincere, things not being so fussy and so rigid when you talk about clothing. So in this collection, for example, there are many different themes that he uses to bring about this childlike fantasy. There are different characters. So in the show notes, they talk about this idea of a businessman that drops his daughter at school. So he's wearing a suit, but he also has a pink rucksack on his back. Or this idea of a industrialist that creates his own playground, or boys and girls wearing their parents' suits, imagining how they would look themselves one day. And that's why in this collection, for example, the tailoring is almost ridiculously oversized. Is veering on Balenciaga levels of oversized, right? Is this idea of kids wearing their parents' suits and playing dress up, and this childlike fun that you think about when you talk about kids. I found that really interesting. They've also done other fun things. They've subverted the fabrics. And this is something that Bottega does every season, by the way. Every season, it's almost become a joke where we talk about, you look at this vest and it looks like cotton, but it's actually made with leather. So what they've done in this collection is they have this really interesting merino wool fabric that they've woven into jacquards, and they've made a fabric that looks like stonewashed denim. So you guys will see it eventually, but that is actually not denim. It's actually merino wool. So that was interesting. They've also made these grocery bags. It kind of, I don't know why, when I saw those grocery bags, it kind of reminded me of Balenciaga in a weird way. Do you guys remember the Erewhon thing? It kind of reminded me of Erewhon in a strange way. But that was really interesting with the grocery bags, because Matthieu Blazy talked about wanting to have a play on the disposable nature of things that we use. And that goes back into the childlike play where to adults, there are a lot of things that children do that we just think as not serious, or, we don't need these toys anymore, throw them away or give them to charity. But it's actually looking at this idea of finding more use and more meaning in things that we find mundane. And that's where the shopping bags come in, that I thought was really interesting. Something also interesting, this is kind of a sidebar, a side note to the collection, that was a big thing on social media, was actually the seats. And I'll show you guys the seats after, because the seats had these kind of very interesting animal motifs that we'll get into. Here we can see once again a backpack in purple and pink. So this is this idea of the businessman who carries his daughter's backpack to school. Not that only women wear pink and purple, men wear that too. Nothing wrong with that as a color, but that was kind of the idea that they explored in the show notes that I found really interesting. Leo says the backpack is crazy. The price will probably also be crazy. The price will also be scary crazy, right? And like I said, I'm such a big fan of Bottega. Yes, I'm not in that tax bracket. Yes, I probably won't be able to buy any Bottega for a very long time. However, just observing the brand, they are one of the leaders, I think, in being able to have this playful aesthetic, but still be taken seriously as a brand that older people that are rich want to wear, genuinely. And it's weird because so many people that I'm a fan of, they veer slightly to one side more than the other. So a good example in my mind is J.W. Anderson. I'm a massive fan of J.W. Anderson's work, but if I was to compare his Loewe to Bottega, I think he veers slightly too playful, to the point where a lot of people, let's say, that take themselves more seriously, probably can't see themselves wearing Loewe, where they could see themselves still wearing Bottega. This piece, once again, is actually not denim. This is actually merino wool woven to look like denim, so that's also really interesting. Holly says, the big oversized clutch is a big trend, but to be honest, Bottega has been doing that for a long time. Yeah, they've been doing that for a long time. Even a big focus that they were talking about with this collection is the Andiamo bags. That's what Bottega is known for. That's their heritage. It's leather goods. So when it comes to bags, Bottega have been doing everything when it comes to bags from the beginning. It's not necessarily anything totally new. JS7 Dragon says, truly hidden luxury. Alex says, Matthew's by far strongest asset is his manipulation of materials. I think his use of leather for basic pieces. These braces make me not be able to speak. For basic pieces such as a striped shirt will go down as one of the most memorable pieces of this decade. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it has, definitely become a thing where it's an inside joke, especially in these streams where we're like, okay, what is Bottega going to do with leather this season? Are they going to make a cotton looking vest, or is it going to be something that looks like denim, or something that's supposed to look like something they've done in the past also is a track pant, a sweat pant that is actually made of leather, socks made of leather. So this season we actually get denim made of merino wool. It's also very much reminds me of Pieter Mulier's Alaya, because Alaya had that collection where they manipulated merino wool and found many different ways to create new products using one fabric, and garments that look completely different even though it's made with the same fabric. That was really, really interesting. So it's interesting how a lot of these brands are kind of being woven into each other and kind of riffing and playing on each other. And this is nothing new. We've seen, do you guys remember a few seasons ago where it seemed like every single brand had a white vest? We saw it on the Chloe show, we saw it with Prada, we saw it with Bottega Veneta, we saw it with so many other brands. Everyone just had a white vest. So I do get this sense sometimes that a lot of these brands riff on each other. Alex says, Loewe is that guy who works in a creative agency, whereas Bottega is the corporate guy who has a slightly creative job. I totally agree. Totally agree. Holly says tailoring is so strong in this. I totally agree. I mean, I love the tailoring. I think some of it is slightly too oversized for me. That, of course, goes into the narrative of this collection, having these childlike sensibilities and this idea of kids wearing their parents' clothing, which is why the shirts are so long and the coats are so big. But actually, maybe it might work for me because things are normally not my size. So by buying something that's supposed to be oversized, it ends up being just right. Like, even look at how long the sleeves on this piece is. The white vest epidemic, Loewe Valentino Bottega. Tosin says Thomas Maya upped the standard on Bottega bags massively. I totally agree. It's also interesting that we don't talk about Thomas Maya enough, because obviously before Daniel Lee, Bottega was still growing quite well and they made a lot of money. I think people act like, Bottega just made absolutely no money until Daniel Lee went there, and then he turned it into like a really buzzy brand, which just isn't the case. He built upon what was there already. So yeah, Thomas Maya is a very good person to bring up. He refined the product offering, especially when it came to bags. And that started to bring about this idea, especially of younger people that have a lot of money buying Bottega brands and seeing Bottega as a viable brand to actually buy into as a young person. That really started with Thomas Maya, and then obviously Daniel Lee amplified that for sure. Christoph says kids wearing their parents' clothing also appears in those wrinkled suit looks, in my opinion. Oh yeah, totally agree. I totally agree. Also, about fabric manipulation, actually, something I forgot to mention is some of the dresses are also made out of leather. So you wouldn't actually think that, because of course the way they flow and the way they move, and I'm guessing that it's a very thin layer of leather that they've used to create some of those dresses. But yeah, they also talked about that in the show notes where they used leather to make the dresses, which is interesting because I always think that as a fabric manipulation thing, that is so interesting and really cool. But as a practical thing, I always think, how What's the viability of wearing a dress that's made out of leather? Is that going to be very breathable? Is that going to be easy to wear? Is that going to actually be nice to wear? And so the concept, I absolutely love it. But then you think of, okay, how do we translate this into day-to-day comfortability and viability? And then you start to think, that's really interesting. Neka says there is skill in oversized tailoring, 100%. There's a fine line between tailoring looking oversized but still refined and like it's deliberate versus you actually just don't know how to make clothes, so the sizes are all over the place. There's a really thin line, like really, really thin line. These Bottega clothes don't look out of place. They don't look like they're not deliberately made oversized. They do look quite refined. It just isn't for me personally, but I do like it as a concept. Neka says, you can easily make the mistake of having the clothes swallow you. In this case, it doesn't look that way. Yeah, I totally agree. Leather dresses can be fine, but not on tropical Australia where I live. This was let me pause this actually. Let me bring it back because this was a piece that made the rounds on social media. This sort of safety pin dress. A lot of people on social media really love this idea. Will we ever have more media collaborations that make fashion fun, like Prada, Spring Summer 18? I guess we'll just have to see about that. It's very interesting because I think a lot of these brands, especially in the modern day, have to have, and I still like the idea, by the way, I'm just saying it as a wider concept. A lot of these brands have this idea of, they have to have this like social media esque look where it kind of does the rounds on social media because visually it's interesting. Now, I don't like that aspect of fashion. I think that there is a lot to be said about the fabrics that people use and the finer details of collections. And unfortunately, when you watch a collection online, a lot of that is missed. So a lot of times when people say, oh, that collection was boring, sometimes I have to push back against that because, there's more to a collection than just like things having to be crazy and crazy colors and crazy prints and patterns and just random things on pieces. I think there's more to fashion than that. People are saying they look like safety matches. You know what? Now that you mention it, they could actually be safety matches. When I saw it, it reminded me more of safety pins because safety pins do have those. Some of them have those red bits at the top, but they could also be matches too. So either or. But it's going back into kind of like the playfulness of the collection. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.